Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Depths, written by Possible Letters 42. I know that nobody there, when it happened, will ever forget. Humanity had appeared on the galactic stage only a few years before, a reclusive species but friendly. They had made initial trade overtures, but firmly refused permission for any trade routes to extend inside of human space proper. Human couriers always took over shipments at one of the many bustling stations ringing human space. It had a cost. But the voracious consumer appetites of humanity meant the galactic commerce had adjusted without much fuss. They were a curious sort, in many ways. Mostly, they were odd to most galactic denizens in how their perception was wired much differently than the galactic norm. Most species in the galaxy had not evolved with written language and spoken word as the primary forms of communication, but rather complex exchanges of pheromones. Even species with no knowledge of one another could receive a detailed emotional readout from basic bodily secretions. So widespread was the biological norm. Humans had informed us that some species on their elusive homeworld, as far as I knew, never seen by any species, used this method to various extents, and they themselves had a limited capacity for pheromone generation. However, to our refined sensibilities, most human pheromones were clunky, unsophisticated things, a shout more than a word. Most species of the galaxy could have entire conversations as nuanced and delicate as any, absolutely wordlessly in their pheromones, whereas human pheromones boiled down to hunger, sex, anger, illness. It was somewhat like trying to have a conversation with a child. For this reason, communications in those early days were strained. Our linguistics were as primitive as their pheromones. We talked past each other often. Consequently, we thought them friendly but simple creatures, of no real depth. With their soft skin and large eyes, also, no real threat. Human space remained unviolated because nobody had cared enough to try. But few believed the rigid rules of humanity would fare well against any real test. Toothless merchants with clumsy pheromones. This was their reputation. Truly, no individual is so foolish as a group of them can manage to be. One inevitable result of human inability to perceive pheromone communication was that they were considered relatively unsophisticated political players. They spoke honestly and earnestly and seemed unaware of plots, gossip, and hidden meanings right under their noses. Their naivete was disarming and of no small charm, which served them in good stead diplomatically. Still, the politically savvy species of the galaxy knew there was only a matter of time until the more aggressive species took advantage, and the Moktid did exactly that. The premier warrior race of the galaxy, the Moktid were biologically quite familiar to the humans, who opined that they appeared similar to some hybrid between the larger versions of the standard bipedal form along with a creature called a fox and another called a wolf from their home world. Brave, clever, and honor-focused, the Moktid were unfortunately still far more driven by the predatory drive of their primitive nature than humanity. The blunt and honest nature of humanity had earned positive initial inroads with the Moktid. However, human trade eclipsed many Moktid merchants, engendering resentment. Eventually, popular Moktid opinion, heavily inflamed by pundits and politicians, came to hold the humans as not only soft and unthreatening, but also to see these upstart primates as dishonorable or mischievous due to their secretive nature. Success over Moktid's merchants, and refusal to allow incursions into human space. The increasingly vitriolic rhetoric reached an inevitable result. Following nearly a year of fruitless negotiations, the Moktid Armada Primus cruised into Earth space on an invasion heading. The less warlike species battened down the hatches and stayed out of the way. None could directly challenge the Moktid, and there was no political will to come to the defense of a species as new and secretive as humans. The invasion wasn't over quickly. It was over instantly. Within a day, the shattered remnants of the Armada Primus, reduced by approximately 87%, returned to Quixeland Station. the home of the Nebula Congress and all species embassies. On the floor of Congress, the Moktud Senator Klimbar delivered the fleet's report in a mixture of pheromonic painting and halting, emotional spoken language, a message delivered in equal parts rage and terror, telling the horrified Congress of weapons that bent the fabric of reality, as well as dishonorable and incredibly brutal combat techniques that sought to take no prisoners. In desperation, the Moktud invoked the right of challenge, one of the most ancient traditions of the Congress. We all expected the humans to brush it off. We all would have. It wasn't mandatory. The right of challenge was a tool meant to prevent war through the combat of two designated representatives. It had never been invoked after a war. There was no incentive for victorious species to limit their spoils and conquest after they had already won. To the shock of all, Senator Ito, a female human senator, quietly accepted on a condition. Klimbar was too stunned for a moment to respond. Ito and Klimbar had been two politicians most heavily involved in negotiations to avoid the war. Neither had wanted it. Both had understood the role of pundits in politics in the unnecessary heat between species. And in their negotiations, they too had become rather public friends over the past year. Something that had caused a great deal of anger amongst both of their peoples as rhetoric ratcheted up in fervor. But neither seemed to care much about that. Klimbar had assumed that the much more physically imposing male human senator Hotchkiss would accept the challenge, if either bothered doing so at all. Ito, diminutive and unassuming, had not crossed her mind. She had to ask Ito to repeat her condition. If humanity prevails in this challenge, do you agree to restore our honor in the eyes of the Moktud and to agree to a peaceful existence? Klimbar stared. The Moktud female was the most formidable gender of the species, and a juggernaut compared to a human. Nearly 10 feet tall, with coarse, thick fur, viciously curving fangs, and 4 razor-sharp talons per forelimb. A Moktud was a fair challenge for a modestly sized bear, let alone an unarmored human. Should you prevail, human honor will be unquestionable, her voice dipped sadly, but you will not. Ito's pheromones, as blunt and unstable as all human pheromones, displayed hints of sad and angry. But all present noted one missing entirely: fear. The two met at midday, 2 days from the challenge per tradition. The Moktud clad only in her fur, the human wearing a light flowing garment and carrying only a slightly curved blade, removed slowly from an ornate wooden sheath. Klimbar roared in challenge. Ito gave a deep bow in silence, holding it for several moments. A single tear fell from her eye. The battle was not important. We all have seen humans fight since that day. The tear is what mattered. Even as Ito raced towards Klimbar with remarkable speed, even as her impossibly keen blade whistled in the air, the species of the Congress reeled from the sole tear that had fallen as the battle began. By the end, which came quickly, while Klimbar lay slain and Ito knelt weeping, the entire Congress was immobile, racked with new and terrible feelings beyond belief. Of all the crude, basic human feelings we had become accustomed to, we had never sensed true human grief. It sundered us all, a depth of conflicting emotion and synesthesia. So powerful, the most stoic of our number wept in empathy. The grief contained in Ito's bright golden admiration for Klimbar's courage, the silver sheen on her fierce devotion to her species, the bedrock marble white of her unshakable sense of duty, the scarlet rage at the unfairness of the situation, and the crushing black void that was the loss of a true friend. Ito left the station and never returned to her post. She lives alone in a small abode in a place called Kamajima. She is considered a great hero of both Moktud and humanity for averting a war and establishing human honor beyond doubt. By all reports, she despises this reputation bitterly and will not tolerate mention of it in her presence. Humanity opened its borders the next day. The same day the Moktud delivered a deep apology for the hubris and requested a formal peace and trade alliance. There was no need for secrecy anymore, no need for borders. We had seen what they were trying to keep hidden. A terrifyingly effortless capacity for killing, an unfathomable depth of feeling. Two incredible gifts combined to form the most bittersweet curse. All species fear and respect humanity. None envy them. End of story. Story number 2. Humanity had a single planet, written by ShaadowOfAPerson. Ambassador Krell sneered at the humans. The decision had been made already, though they would not know of it for a few cycles yet. They were a puny species, one with no ambition. They sat on the lowest rung of the council, a single planet to their name. Even the Drellians, lichen farmers, had 3. Pathetic. The humans rarely spoke. When they did, it was of trains. The scorer didn't have such a term. They translated it as primitive mass transit systems. Their fleets rode the singularity tunnels between systems on carriers the size of islands. What threat could be posed by a species that still laid track? Such lack of ambition had to be rewarded. The scorer had to expand. The solution was simple. When the war drum sounded, Krell volunteered to lead the cleansing. The Grand Scorer Warfleet fell through the human orbital warp gate. Sensor readouts blared out their reports. It seemed the humans had been foolish enough to report their military capabilities to the Council accurately, paltry as they were. 0 carriers, 6 frigates, and a smattering of orbital platforms. No life signs. Atmospheric readings, Krell barked. Earth's empty, hissed the tactical officer. No sapient biosignatures. They disappeared as we entered the system. Krell's claws flexed. A trick. Had to be. His holodisplay lit with the fleet's battle count. 74 carriers, 1,776 frigates, 88 million fighter drones. Against this. Burn there! The orbital gate exploded. A single shot from a railgun battery on Luna punched through it. Insane, Krell thought. Gates were sacred. More than that, they were expensive. It cost the Scorer nearly a year of industrial output to build one. It was unthinkable to destroy your own. The humans had reported possessing 74 gates in the Earth system, most terrestrial, an obvious lie. The Scorer had concluded, but perhaps. No matter. Krell's laugh rattled around the bridge. No reinforcements for them either. Proceed. Fragment 1, Supply Chain Engineer Journal, Battle Hour 1. Handwritten, smudged graphite. Evacuation of Earth's populace complete in 20 minutes. Room for improvement, 5 minutes. Redirecting all train flows. Total override. The operation should be profitable. They think it's a war. Ha! The salvage will be great. P.S. Get on Xerxes Sector's ass. Their signaling system issues are reducing drone throughput by 12%. If this was a serious fight, that could matter. Fragment 2, Scorer Tactical AI Output, Battle Hour 3. Data burst translated. Enemy population 0 confirmed. Enemy industry 2, terrestrial facilities. Enemy assets error. Recommendations update axioms. Query. Define industry when construction occurs in transit. Define ship when drones outmass carriers by 3 orders of magnitude. Define war when opponent prioritizes scrap collection over survival. Earth boiled into a cloud of steel. Human gates were on the surface, under mountains, near rivers, on rocks that circled electric orbits around the sun. The Council mandated reports of carriers, of frigates. Fighter drones were useless without them. By definition, they would not travel the interplanetary distances required of any other war. For any other war. The Scorer Tactical AI revised its count every second. 10,000, 100,000, a million, a trillion. They boiled up from trains, traveling on long loops between gates, not even slowing down to release their cargo into the atmosphere. Then into Scorer Fleet, disappearing back into the void to restock. Impossible, the tactical officer hissed. Our one planet's industry can't possibly support this. Krell watched a carrier die. Drones throwing themselves at point defense cannons until they ran out of bullets, throwing themselves at shields until they ran out of charge, throwing themselves at armor. Plasma cutters carefully dissecting a living ship. Scorer troops systematically vented to the void. They're recycling, he realized. Drones crippled by point defense joined vast plates of Scorer battle armor, caught by tug drones and hauled back to Luna, loaded into train cars that had just disgorged a fresh wave of drones. Destroy the tracks, Krull ordered. Drones repaired those faster than they could. Fragment 3, a Void Child's nursery rhyme, recovered from unsalvageable wreckage of Carrier X7. Sing-song cadence, human-accented galactic common. Tick, tick, tick goes the track layer. Between the stars where the cold gets sharper. Spin a thread, scratch your sun. More's not fun till the scrapping's done. Whispered addendum. Mama says the darkness not empty, just forgot to bring the light. Papa says we'll stitch it pretty, rail by rail, by rail by rail. Krull's flagship, like the rest of his fleet, died slowly, let dry by a storm of kinetics. Magazines ran dry by a seemingly endless supply of drones, alerts blaring hull breach with no regard for battle tactics. The ship simply being disassembled from the freer forwards. They broadcast surrender codes on all available frequencies. No response. The humans weren't crew, they were thorough. Krill understood in the end, long after it mattered, this wasn't a war at all. This was a salvage operation. Fragment 4, Human Engineering Post-Combat Report. Subject score of fleet SK-77 salvage efficiency. Total mass recovered 98.2%, excluding biologicals. Notable gains, 74 singularity cores, repurposed as void locomotive engines. 1,776 frigate hulls, melted into rail ties. See Andromeda Spur-Faced 2. 88 million drone batteries, powering daycare simulators. See Codex 8835-AC. Recommendation, next invasion fleet should use more tungsten. Current stockpiles suboptimal for transgalactic bridge joints. Direct energy to matter fabrication inefficient. 3 years later, a Galactic Union scout stumbled on a structure in the dark between stars. Not a planet, not a star, a lattice of graphene and iron spinning slowly in the abyss. Sensors identified it as a rail hub, its tracks stretching into the voids between galaxies. The captain, a scorer, ordered an immediate retreat. Too late. A wave of drones emerged, happy for fresh construction material. Not fighters, blunt, faceless things, builders. The scout was dismantled systematically, engines first. The last transmission showed a human boarding the bridge, wearing a faded Earth flag. Relax, a voice cracked through the man-made scorer comms. We're just laying track. The council convened an emergency session. Ambassador Louvet of the human delegation took a place at the lowest tier, adjusted a scarf. The chamber's acoustics carried her side to every podium. You misunderstood. We don't want your council seats. She pulled up a holographic map. One planet, 1,000 threads extending into the cosmic void between galaxies. 456 self-sustaining ring habitats. 325 O'Neill cylinders, 3 Dyson spheres, built around rogue stars. We don't care for your territory. You counted planets, we counted the spaces in between. You know how much fits in that silence. She smiled, fingers tapping a tablet. Hint, it's a power of 10 game. You lose. A child's voice chirped from the rail map, bearing the crushing weight of banality. Now departing at 13:24 service from Andromeda Central Station to Vertigo Stellar Forge, expected arrival 14:02. Lee smiled. You keep the warm worlds, you rule the galaxy. We'll take the quiet places, the void between. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters. Bushmaster 117, Casper Arnholtz, Draxzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.